Dune Prophecy's 5th episode has a relatively insignificant classroom scene. It shows Acolyte Jen's independent spirit and propensity to question the Sisterhood in ways some of the other students might not, making her a bit of a pain, but also someone Tula can use in her situation with Lila. That and her not having the nightmare everyone else is having, which means she might be resistant. The two acolytes became friends during their training on Wallach 9, and that's all that's really going on in the scene. They're doing an exercise with heat. Still, I think there's a show about the sisters honing their skills I would watch, and when I first heard of a TV project based on the Sisterhood, that's what I imagined. The Bene Gesserit developed many compelling tools they have at their disposal, like imprinting, which is touched on in this episode. Why not just see how they become what they become? I had the same experience when reading Sisterhood of Dune. Frank Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson's novel spends what turned out to be a surprisingly small amount of time getting into the day-to-day operations on Wallach 9, opting instead to jump around between several stories across the Dune universe. To be fair, the show swapped Sisterhood for Prophecy in its name, and only really deals with matters directly related to the Sisterhood characters. The Prophecy could be the saving grace of the series, since the palace parts haven't reached a level of intrigue that excites me to visit Salusa Secundus. And I say that as a guy who loves that sort of thing. There's a big reveal in the penultimate episode that I hadn't really considered going in. I mean, I knew it was a possibility and I thought about it, but I just didn't think that was the direction they were going in. Because I'd been thinking about how the Schools of Dune series relied so much on involving everything connected to the original Dune story, while I was watching and Tula fired up the DNA test, I said out loud, Desmond has to be an Atreides or Harkonnen. That's just how it always goes. And bam, the real answer is that he's both. So that was a little bit surprising. I guess this is a long way to get around to saying that the TV show reminds me more of the expanded Dune universe than the core series written by Frank Herbert. It's more concerned with filling in blanks and connecting to things you're familiar with from the main series, rather than creating something that can stand on its own. This can be fine. This is only the first part of explaining what's happening with Desmond. It explains why he has issues with the Sisterhood, which is illustrated when he picks up the piece of cloth he was carrying when he first entered the palace and was first introduced. We know now it was part of a sister's robe. It doesn't explain why he thinks he survived being eaten by a sandworm or what his power is. The second part of that is something that gets touched on, and I think people who have read the prequels or know what happened with them pretty much know where things are going after Raqualla's return. Still, I think to end well and leave viewers with an overall good impression of this project and more potential trips into Dune lore, it's gonna have to nail it. The show could answer some major questions, not just the mysteries it presented or just throwing out a word like abomination like this might be the first time it was ever used as it did in this episode. Or hinting toward the litany against fear. You know, fear is a mind killer, the thing everyone knows from Dune even if they've never gotten into it. The plan the Bene Gesserit are working to make happen when Paul Atreides is born is not the one they have right now, so that's one thing, just for one example. So as we get to the end, let's hope they save the best for last and that everything fits together when the final pieces are revealed. We did move in that direction, but we also had to spend a lot of time in the palace side of the story to get there. This episode opens with a ceremony for the Emperor's new elite regiment. That's really just a way to show that Havako traded in the Sisterhood for Desmond and is now following his guidance as he once did theirs. Francesca, the one remaining acolyte from Valya's clique in the flashbacks from when they were younger that we hadn't seen as an adult yet, shows up. That's really to show that the sisters have been playing a long game, and Empress Natalya doesn't like Francesca any more than she liked Kasha. Inez doesn't like any of it, which isn't a big surprise considering the last episode. When Constantine apologizes for not following through with her plan, she kind of gets it when he says it was because when he mistook his appearance as support, Havako was proud of him. But we'll come back to Inez because this isn't the biggest thing that goes down for her in the episode. How Francesca Francesca fits into the long plan as more interesting than her interactions with the Imperial family in this episode. Her honesty about that role when she talks to her son was refreshing, considering the rest was pretty straightforward. His purpose, the reason he was brought into this world, the question that he asked her, and why she used her imprinting skills to seduce Havoko and forever affect him so that the Sisterhood might easily sway him, is to protect his sister Inez, the person they intend to be the next leader of the Imperium. She doesn't pull any punches. He was born for a purpose, and that's what it is. As for why she was there in the first place, she did believe he sent her a message. That was all orchestrated by Valya, who explains later that she couldn't be upfront with the details because the Spacing Guild is known to monitor dispatches, which is a reference that confirms they are in existence at this point in the story. The Mother Superior has a plan to take Desmond Hart, who was named the new Bashar, out of the picture, and she wants Francesca to swoop in to get the Emperor back on board by allowing a new Truesayer in and allowing Inez to study at Wallach 9. Francesca wants to know how Constantine fits in and is told that getting the son of a sister to be the commander of the new Imperial fleet would be a key victory. It stands out that Valya doesn't flinch when asked if this is the reckoning Mother Raqualla warned of, but she does add that Desmond might just be the tip of the spear. Part 1 of the plan involves Harkonnen getting a meeting with the new Bashar so he can grovel some. We see this before we hear Valya lay out her plan, and he's convincing enough that you're not sure if he's there on his own, willing to give something up on his Truesayer to regain favor with House Carino. There's some drug use. Haro gives up some information about a smuggling operation, and Desmond gives him a gift before demanding any information he has about Sisterhood activity going forward. I'm not exactly sure what the gift was other than Haro's reaction, which leads you to believe it's valuable. They were getting high, so I initially thought it was related to that, but it's also just an orb that also lights up with that blue glow that seems to be connected with thinking machines. With Evgeny out of the way, this makes sense. He may not be a big fan of the situation she put him in the last episode, but they do need to get a better trade deal for that whale fur. Everything else aside, Valya represents his best chance to regain some of House Harkonnen's status. Kieran inadvertently gets wrapped up in things as Desmond and his new squad set out to make an example of the smugglers. In asking the Swordmaster if he'd like to join for some insurgent bashing and possibly some torture, he tips his hand and gives Kieran a chance to go warn Michaela. She doesn't let on, but already knows what's coming and is in the middle of preparing to blow the bar and wipe out Desmond for good. There's a brief exchange where she points out that he's probably not sticking around because his cover isn't blown, but because he has feelings for the princess. She tells him not to make the mistake of thinking he can become the man he's pretending to be ever. Since we're dealing with star-crossed lovers, which will come back up later when Inez hears about his fate, you can't help but think about Tula massacring his ancestors. Up until the end, the plan goes perfectly. The smuggler gave up the bar, and now all Desmond needs is for Michaela to tell him how the Sisterhood is connected, and all she needs to do is set off her explosives. As his troops are trashing the place, he tries to use her Fremen identity to find an angle, and when he realizes he's not getting anywhere, he goes to look upstairs. He finds a lotus spice, which I guess he already would have been expecting, but also Michaela's Sisterhood robe to confirm his suspicions. He doesn't have long to celebrate as the explosions start right after that, but he activates a shield which at least contributes to his surviving the ordeal. As they fight their way out, Kieran notices Michaela's knife, and he figures out that she's been working for the Sisterhood as well. It's not clear how he'll be able to leverage that information since Constantine is waiting for him when he returns to the palace. He found the scans he made, and with the gentle prodding from his mother, took the opportunity to land a blow to the rebels for his father. He gets rewarded, and at least in this area, the Sisterhood got what they wanted since he's being installed as the commander of the new fleet. It's another blow for Inez, who visits Kieran in his cell, where she uses what she knows about True Sense to try to get some answers. It appears his affection was real, and the whole thing about killing her family, he couldn't go through with it. He chose her over his principles, even though he's fine with dying for them if that's how things play out. As far as the amateur Truesayer can tell, he believes he could bring about a better Imperium. We'll have to wait to find out how that'll influence her decisions. It might not be great for the Sisterhood, who have so much riding on her being a sympathetic leader for their cause. But it's not as bad as the news Raqualla gets when she tells Valya she failed to kill Desmond. She has a one-way ticket to a safe house on Arrakis, and a stern reminder that she's just a cog in the Sisterhood machine. And when even Theodosia piles on to remind her who her people are, it sends a pretty direct message that she could be replaced. No one understands how Desmond survived, but Valya mentions there's a contingency plan in place for him. As Tula promised, Lila doesn't spend all her time screaming like a caged animal. In a lucid moment, Jen starts talking about the nightmares, and there's a noticeable shift in the person she's talking to. She says they all saw the gaping maw of Shai Hulud, swallowed by darkness until two eyes stared back. When she says it wasn't a nightmare, it was prescience, and she foresaw the reckoning that would drive the Imperium to tyranny, Jen realizes she's not talking to Lila anymore. If he succeeds, humanity will backslide into self-destruction. The switch here was my favorite part of this episode, because watching this young actor transform into a reasonable Raqualla stand-in was fun. There's also important work to do, and time for some questions, like did Valya and Dorothea eventually start working together? Tula doesn't lie necessarily, but doesn't mention how things ended for Dorothea either. The key information comes from a sample from Kasha's brainstem. Mother Raqualla notices tissue damage that she's seen before during the war. She explains that the machines designed a pathogen that incubated in the human body in the liver. The enzyme in Kasha's sample is similar but stored itself in the brain, concentrated in the fear center. From there, she concludes it's a virus. Everything that's happening is connected to a genetically modified airborne RNA retrovirus. There's mention of the Omnius Plague, also known in the prequel books as the Omnius Scourge. As she said, the machines resorted to this towards the end of the Butlerian Jihad. It wiped out a huge amount of the human population, but was delivered somewhat conventionally in canisters that traveled through space. This doesn't explain how it's been redesigned or how Desmond can deploy it locally as he does, or even if that's exactly what's going on. It connects back to Omnius, essentially the collected AI humans fought against during the war. The semi-independent robot Erasmus created the plague itself, though, with the help of a Tulaxa scientist. This might lead to a connection based on Desmond's home planet, which I mentioned before had been used for Tulaxa organ farm. We'll have to wait and see on that, because after she examines the genetic sample, we know, and Tula knows, that he's her son from her night with Orry before she did her business on him and his family. This might add an additional layer to the complications the show has to resolve in its final episode. As I started to wonder last week, Natalya seems primed to play a role in how things play out. Francesca's arrival and reconnection with Havako supercharged that, and she ends the episode kissing Desmond and making her intentions plain. She wants to rid the Imperium of the witches. On some level, we know that isn't going to happen, but if the first 5 episodes have taught us anything, Valya's plans don't always play out how she'd like them to. As far as I know, the final episode is quite a bit longer than the already beefy 60 minutes that we've gotten used to. It'll be interesting to see how things play out and how it will affect the course of the Bene Gesserit over the next 10,000 years. And I think that's a great place to leave things. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.